And I am back. We're changing it up a little bit. Ben Razza out. Greg Ehrenberg in. It's NBA Live Before Lock, Friday, August 21st. Time to break it all down again. We're getting closer and closer. We got a little piece of information since the strategy show was over. Tyler Johnson into the starting lineup for the Brooklyn Nets, replacing Joe Harris. But we'll dive into other stuff first, like, hi, Greg Ehrenberg, how are you?
Hi, Josh Engleman. How are you? And
I'm pretty good.
You know who was else doing well? 1 seeds. They're back. They're cool again. Remember when 8 seeds were all the rage? How about 1 seeds winning games like expected yesterday? The Lakers beat the Blazers by I don't even remember what the final score was, like 30 or something like that.
Yeah, a lot.
And then the Bucks also a little hairy, but not really. It was a pretty comfortable win, and they were leading by double digits all the way through. I kind of expect both those teams to have winning those series in 5 games.
You and me both. They just don't have enough. They're missing too much, both teams. This is going to be a weird slate. I'm not entirely comfortable where I am at the top, just relative to each other. So you and I haven't talked about the slate yet. You have been talking baseball for at least an hour previous to this show. So we're going to transition you to basketball right now. Before we fully get started, as everybody gets in the door, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, notification bell. You guys know all the goods. We're going to be here for the next hour, breaking down your questions, breaking down sort of everything. So let's start here. Who are you paying up for today?
Yeah, so it's kind of a weird slate, and we talked about this the other day, where there aren't nearly as many pay-up options on today's slate as there was yesterday's slate, the way that the every other day kind of options work. So the only 2 guys who really, really stand out to me, like obviously, like it's not that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George aren't viable, but to me, Luka Doncic and Joel Embiid are just much stronger options, in my opinion, than those 2 guys. I don't know if you feel the same. I don't know if you feel differently, but I'm more honed in on Embiid and Doncic than the Clippers guys.
Well, let's have a fun show. I am more honed in on Kawhi Leonard and Paul George than the other options to pay up today. They are the 2 guys. Well, Paul George, I guess we'll consider him a pay up option. 8,300. He is probably my favorite play of the day, just given his price tag. And his ownership. I think that's the biggest key here. Kawhi at 20%, Paul George at 19%. We're seeing Luka get up to 32%. Not that I have an issue with it. Joel Embiid at 29%, but also seems fine. I have relatively the same amounts as the public for those 2 guys. The guys that I'm mostly avoiding are Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis to a lesser degree. My only concern, and I'm not really sure how I can even combat it right now, is that I don't really get excited over having a Kawhi plus Paul George lineup, even though on a 4-game slate, the way that this is set up, I think it's unavoidable. I probably have more than I would really want to have. But right now, relative to salary, given I've got them both in for 38 minutes, I just think that they're slightly underpriced for where they belong. George in particular, I think is just too underpriced.
Yeah, that's fair, and I don't necessarily disagree. It's just within the overall context of the slate itself and compared to the other options. Like, I just think that Doncic has a way higher ceiling than Paul George or Kawhi Leonard. And then Joel Embiid also, just he matches up so well against the 76ers where they don't have anybody to guard him. Like, Enes Kanter was on for long stretches of last game. Like, he crushed him. And the other thing, too, is the way that the 76ers basically really need to win today, right? Like, there's no way they could lose today's game and fall behind 3-0. Like, Embiid could push for 40 minutes. And I don't necessarily feel that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George will be pushed to play as many minutes as Joel Embiid will.
Yeah, and I don't want to talk anybody off of Luka and Embiid. Like I said, I have 30% of both of those guys right now. So it's not as if they are avoids to me. I like the efficiency of the pricing on Kawhi and Paul George, and that's what's making them separate for me. The other big piece of it is that I think like the sub 4K guys are a little bit less exciting today than they have been, or at least that they were on Wednesday. So to me, I'm grabbing a couple extra $100 from the top more often than not, and not dropping all the way down to like the 3 to 3.7 range. More of my value is landing in like the low 4s. So I think that's why I'm also seeing a little bit of funneling towards Kawhi and Paul George.
Yeah. So the other thing I'll add with Paul George, he scored over 50 DK points 6 times the entire season. So it's not that I don't think that he has upside. It's just that he hasn't done it often enough for me this season to look at him and be like, hey, I think that Paul George is like surefire, like going to score a ton of fantasy points. Like he's been fairly steady as a fantasy producer this year, like in that like 35 to 38 fantasy point range, which gets bumped up a little bit because we expect him to play more minutes in this spot. His minutes weren't really up last game, except he also got into really quick foul trouble. But I'm just not sure that he has like that 40-minute upside.
I hope he does, given my ownership right now. I've got him in for 38, so I'm with you there. I don't think he goes the whole way. The interesting piece for this game is that if it really does stay close, then I expect Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to just soak up more minutes in the second half. Their first half rotation will be the big piece of how I feel because they're going to be out there, and especially with Pat Bev out now. Not that Pat Bev affects Paul George and Kawhi's minutes all that much.
Here's how it does affect them, though, and here's why I like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard a little bit less. It's kind of something we talked about the other day, where I like Lou Williams a little bit, and then obviously the situation totally changed anyway because Patrick Beverley got ruled out, and that changed the amount of minutes that Lou Williams was expected to play anyway. But
right.
Lou Williams, now that we know that Patrick Beverley's out ahead of time, Lou Williams is going to play more minutes than he otherwise would. Lou Williams is such a higher usage player than Patrick Beverley is that takes away some of the shot attempts from Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. So just with Lou Williams getting extra run on the court, I think that hurts their upside a little bit.
Okay, we are fully on the opposite side of this game today. I rallied very hard against Lou Williams this morning on the strategy show because he is not Lou Williams when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are going to be playing 80% plus of the game. His usage becomes non-existent. He becomes an even bigger liability on defense because he is the first focus for the Dallas Mavericks. They're going to put him into every action when he's on the floor. Because he's really bad defensively. You play Lou Williams for his offense, but if he's a limited Lou Williams, are they better off just going to a better defender if Lou can't be Lou?
So here's the thing. Last game, he played 32 minutes with a 27% usage rating. So it's hard for me to look at that last game and just assume that they're going to do something totally different. I get they lost last game, and that could be where they deviate a little bit. But I just have to look at what happened the last game where he played 32 minutes with a high usage rating. Even in the first game of the series, he also played 31 minutes in that game. So it's hard for me to expect that Lou Williams is going to be such a liability defensively that he comes off the floor because he's always a liability defensively and they're still playing him healthy minutes.
I'm a little nervous about Lou's uptick in time and in usage because of how bad Paul George shot on Wednesday. I think you can just naturally get Lou. Like, I think you can naturally raise Lou Will to second option when someone is shooting poorly. My anticipation is that Paul George doesn't shoot 4 for 20 or whatever the hell it was on Wednesday again. And if he is a better part of the offense, I think that comes at the expense of Lou Will. Ultimately, for those three guys in particular, I would set a rule in Fantasy Cruncher, max 2 of 3. There's not really a scenario where I would want all 3 of those guys in a lineup.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I did the other day also. And I think we were both on board with that. We're talking about Williams. Yeah. There's no way you could put all 3 of them into a lineup together and expect to have upside unless something crazy happens where the game goes to overtime. In that case, like you're going to need the lineup to have like Luka Doncic, Kristaps Porzingis, and just everybody from that game anyway, because there's going to be 1 million points scored if it goes to overtime. It by far has the highest total on the slate.
This is going to be a really tricky game to nail down. Do you like anything else from the Clippers side? Do you think Reggie? I guess we got to talk about Reggie Jackson, 23% owned. That one to me is a stay away.
So I wouldn't call it a stay away because I still think there's upside there. Like it's hard for me to totally ignore a point guard who's so cheap that's starting, especially when he has had games where he's played well for the Clippers. As the starter, he's played poorly more often than he's played well. I wouldn't call it a stay away, but it's not like an all-in player. Somebody who's like, I need to jam Reggie Jackson to half my lineups. Like he's somebody I would get exposure to.
What are you anticipating for his minutes?
It's tough. I have him at 26 right now because that's what he played last game. So I just think that's reasonable when we have such a small data size. But the situation's similar last game because Patrick Beverley was out. Obviously, it's the same teams playing against each other. the reason that they would deviate is because they lost last game. And so you have to change something. But I'm still going to look at last game and just say like, hey, here's what happened last game. I'm going to assume about the same thing to happen. Obviously, it's a little different because I don't think Paul George is going to be quite as bad. I don't think Paul George is going to get into early foul trouble. So that's going to alter things a little bit. But I'm going to consider the rotation to be about the same.
Yeah, we had Paul George play 31 and a half minutes on Wednesday. He skipped his final stint in the second quarter, which was, basically like a 6-minute stint, played the entire third quarter. Here's the bigger question. What do you think the most likely closing lineup is for the Clippers?
This is also tough because I don't know what the status of Montrezl Harrell is, right? Because he played 15 minutes the first game of the series, 21 minutes the second game of the series. And then let me bring up, like Doc Rivers had some quotes that made me optimistic and pessimistic at the same time about Montrezl Harrell, where he was like, I want to play him, except I can't. Let's see. I'm going to bring up the exact quote so I have it.
I mean, he looks big right now. He does not look like he's in shape.
He does not look in shape, which Doc Rivers said as much. He said his rhythm's not great. His conditioning's not great. It's just a tough place to try to integrate the guy. We need him, but it's tough to throw him in. So to me, like I look at that and it's like Doc Rivers wants to play him, but doesn't have an issue not playing him if he doesn't look well. But at the same time, if Harrell's out there and he's playing well, I think that Doc Rivers is going to be like, hey, we're tied 1-1. We need him. He's one of our 5 best players. So we're going to run him out there. So I think that there's a chance that Montrezl Harrell closes. But at the same time, it's hard for me to be confident in that because he, like you said, he visually does not look in shape and he's not playing to the best of his abilities right now.
So let's just say Montrezl Harrell is in the closing lineup. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are not coming out of that closing lineup. Who are the final 2 spots then? I'd be surprised if Marcus Morris isn't out there as a closer. At that point, then, do you want it to be Lou Will and Montrezl Harrell out there in a closing lineup? Is that going to be enough defensively?
So this is what also kind of makes it a little tough to predict, and I'm hedging a lot here, but it depends if the Clippers are up or down also.
Yeah.
Like if they're winning, then I think there's maybe a slightly less chance that Lou Williams is out on the court. If they're losing, then I think it's much more likely he's on the court because they're going to need to score points to catch up. I do expect them to be winning because even though they lost last game, I have to look at the spread for this game and see the Clippers as 4.5-point favorites. I think they are the better team. I think they're more likely to be winning. But if it's not Lou Williams, I also don't know where they go. Like, I don't think they go with Landry Shamet. Reggie Jackson has been total dog shit this series. I don't think they're going to go with him. He's such a liability when he's on the court, too, because he doesn't care who he's playing with. Like, Reggie Jackson looks at Paul George. He looks at Kawhi Leonard. And he goes, you know who should be taking the shot on this possession? Me. So that's what I don't like about Reggie Jackson is that he seems to kind of lack the awareness of who he plays with. But I'll still say the most likely closing lineup is Kawhi, Paul George, Lou Williams, Marcus Morris, and Montrezl Harrell.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see Shamet be in there if the Clippers are leading, just because I think that plays better to a lead. If you're trying to maintain a lead, then don't give up as many points. Shamet will likely be better at that. Obviously, Beverly would be a part of that if he were healthy. He is not. I think nailing the Clippers is going to be one of the biggest pieces of the day because I think there's so much ambiguity in what they look like in the fourth quarter.
So I wasn't able to catch your earlier show because I'm doing a million shows myself today. I'm doing the baseball one after. But what was your take on Montrezl Harrell? Because I think he's a really strong GPP play, and I have minimal confidence in him, though.
I think he's going a bit over-owned right now. We have him projected for 16% ownership. Like, I like him, and he's 4,100. That's great. He can certainly provide value on that salary, even if he does continue to just play like 20 minutes. I'm not confident that he just starts soaking up even more time here. I think this is more of a long game. What's the Clippers line on this series right now? You don't happen to have it off the top of your head, do you? It's got to be relatively big, right?
It's like minus 330 now. Like, it's gotten pretty tight after the last game. I'm bringing it up, but I remember, and it also could have moved since I last looked at it, but it's around that range.
Okay.
Minus 345.
Okay. So in the grand scheme of things, the Clippers are safe-ish. They are playing this game and this series as if they're playing more games and series moving forward. I'm not expecting Montrezl Harrell to suddenly play 28 minutes. I'm excited to see it because I like Montrezl Harrell. I think we're probably a game or two early. If he wasn't getting ownership, love the idea of going there. At 16%, I think he's just over-owned now.
Yeah, I mean, 16 isn't crazy ownership though, so I don't mind it at the same time also. In terms of minutes right now, I think like 24, 25 is reasonable, but I also think we can't quite expect the same permanent production we're getting from during the rest of the season, just because, like we said, like he doesn't look the same physically and he just hasn't played all that well so far. I mean, we look at his first 2 games of the series, 15 minutes, 8.5 TK fantasy points, 22 minutes, 11.5 TK points. But still, just the way that the minutes have trended upwards, it seems that we're heading towards 23 to 25 minutes or something in that range. And there's potential for the upside there. I like the upside, but it's just hard to be confident in them.
Another piece to this that I would like to point out is, again, same thing for Montrezl Harrell. If he's playing more minutes, he's also playing more minutes against or with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, 2 guys that are definitely ahead of him in the pecking order. A lot of Montrezl Harrell's appeal and a lot of Lou Williams' appeal is chopping up second units during the regular season. We're just going to have a different sort of structure to the game. Here's a question for you. 4,100 for Harrell, 4,300 for Daniel Tice. Tice at half the ownership. Do you have a preference between those 2 guys sort of in the same area?
So, yeah, in that situation, it's Tice, like relative to ownership, because Tice is just somebody who I overall have more confidence in his playing time, even though he only played 12.5 minutes last game and 25 minutes the game before. Fouls were a little bit of an issue, which I guess that's always a risk going up against Joel Embiid. But I have more confidence in the per minute production of Daniel Tice right now than I do in the per minute production of Montrezl Harrell, just because Harrell, I think, is like 50, 60% of his normal self.
Right. We're on the same page there. I just think there's a lot in this mid-4s range where I don't necessarily trust Harrell's playing time, but I trust the rest of Jeremy Grant, Paul Millsap, who's been terrible, that I'm going back to, unfortunately.
Marc Gasol.
Not today. So cue him up. I mean, I have shares of Marc Gasol. I don't think it's possible to look worse than he did on Wednesday. Just was unable to be a part of pick and roll defense with Caris LeVert and Jarrett Allen. Looked slow. He's not going to close. They've been closing, or they closed Wednesday's game with Siakam at the 5 and went Van Vliet, Lowry, Anunoby, Norm Powell, Siakam. I think that would be the same closing lineup if this game were close again, unless Ibaka just happens to be cooking. So we're basically looking at 3 rotations for Marc Gasol. I think I gave him 22 minutes at that point in time. Not all that enamored with it.
Yeah, I think he's a little bit of playing time upside, because the reason his minutes have been limited is because he just sucks right now. And what's funny too is it's like the opposite, where it's like DeMarc Gasol getting like too good of shape and it's like altering his game or something, because this is the best shape I've ever seen Marc Gasol in. This is like the alternate of Montrezl Harrell. Montrezl Harrell's out of shape and isn't playing well right now, and Marc Gasol is in shape and can't do anything. The other thing also, Marc Gasol is pretty old at this point and has a pretty long injury history. One of the things that's kind of interesting about the long layoff is guys aged up, they got 6 months older. Some of these guys were in their mid-30s. Like, they could kind of just be washed during that time, and we didn't realize it because there was so much time off. So maybe Marc Gasol just kind of passed it at this point. At 4,000 on DraftKings, I do think there's a chance for upside just because the Nets have always struggled against centers. But it's another guy who it's tough to have confidence in, and it's hard for me to not be biased. I'm sure with you also, because we both liked Marc Gasol last slate, and he was so bad that it makes it so difficult to go back to him.
Yeah, I have 4% today, and I'm sure he'll smash now and be the ultimate regret. That's how I felt yesterday for the running back the Tuesday games. Is there anybody you want to touch on specifically now, since you talked about baseball earlier today? Like, what's your favorite stuff for today?
My favorite stuff?
Yeah, high end guys, mid tier, low end. Like, where are you most focused as of right now? Who would be your highest exposed guys, I guess?
Joel Embiid. He's just the player I have the most confidence in, because I think the matchup is so good. And I just think because of the Sixers situation that they're going to play him as many minutes as he could possibly handle. And he's already crushed the Celtics so far this series. The fantasy totals haven't been crazy high, but 53 and a half in both those games. Usage rating is really high. And the minutes, I think, have upside. He played 34 and 37 minutes the last couple of games. As long as the Sixers don't get blown out in this game, which I guess there is some risk of that happening. And maybe that's on your mind also. If this game stays competitive, it means two things. One, it means Joel Embiid destroyed because there's no other way this game stays close. The other thing, too, is he has to play a ton of minutes for it to stay close. If those two conditions aren't met, then the 76ers lose by like 15 points. Yeah,
the range of outcomes on Embiid are gigantic because if he decides that the series is already over and loafs through a first half, like it's going to get really bad. At the same time, the only way that it doesn't happen is if he goes absolutely crazy. Like he's the only mechanism for them to be viable in this series. And he's got to go from the jump today. They are out of time for screwing around. Is Embiid the guy that cares enough about that? I think we're going to find out here. Like he should try to take it to Tice the entire time and then hope that they can play their cards right against what I assume is now Enes Kanter and not Robert Williams.
The other thing too, it's a pretty reasonable price tag for him. Like 9,800 for Embiid is like just too cheap in my opinion, especially considering the gravity of this game. Like he was, what was it, 9,900 last game. What's weird is in the end of the regular season bubble games, he was like 10,600. Right. So it's weird that all of a sudden in the playoffs where they like need him to play 40 minutes, the pricing algorithm's like, all right, well, I guess he has to be $1,000 less expensive now. That doesn't make any sense to me. So all those things considered, I like Joel Embiid. I think outside of Doncic, he is the most upside on the slate. And the other thing too is that you compare him to the other guys, like he's only $200 more expensive than Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah.
And Joel Embiid's the better per minute fantasy producer. I consider him to have, just a more of a must-win type game. So that's why I like Joel Embiid to Kawhi Leonard. I would feel differently if Embiid was like priced where I think he should be priced.
I have not that it affects anything that I'm doing from a DFS perspective. This is just like the data is the data to me. From a personal aspect, I see too big of a scenario where Embiid is lazy if this goes poorly through the first quarter and he just sulks his way to like a really ugly game and a low effort game. I posed this question to Dave Loughran in a DM. I posed this question to Ben Raza on the show earlier today. If you are the Golden State Warriors, would you trade, or if you're the Philadelphia Sixers, would you take this trade from the Golden State Warriors? Number 2.
The answer is no, by the way, but go ahead.
Number 2, the Timberwolves protected pick from next year and Andrew Wiggins contract for either one of Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid.
No, because there's a couple of reasons. First of all, like I just don't want anything to do with Wiggins and his contract. But the other thing also is not only is Wiggins and his contract bad. I was talking with somebody on Twitter yesterday. He was like, yeah, except does Wiggins' contract look as bad in the future when the cap goes up? And my response was the cap probably isn't going up. Yeah. Especially next year, the cap's probably going down. So if you think that Wiggins' max contract is going to be like, well, the value of a max contract goes up in a couple of years, it doesn't, because the way that the season is likely going to be shortened, that there's going to be, we don't know what the situation is totally going to be next year, except it stands to reason the cap's going to get slashed a decent amount. And that Wiggins contract is just such an albatross. Like it's crazy that Timberwolves were able to trade off that contract. And I mean, we've seen untradeable contracts get traded a decent amount over the last couple of years in the NBA. But
hi, Chris Paul.
Yeah, Wiggins getting traded twice in a calendar year or over the course of a year would just be so insane to me.
What if I told you that Brett Brown is the coach of the Sixers next year? Are you more likely to make a deal?
I mean, the team needs changes, right? I think that's pretty clear. I still think that Embiid and Simmons could operate together. It's just not ideal, though. It's not the perfect fit. I think there's so much talent there that they could make it work. And I still think if that shot that Kawhi Leonard took in Game 7 hits every part of the rim and falls in, if that doesn't drop, how much different does the outlook of the 76ers change if they end up winning that series? Like, things could be so much different for them. Obviously, that's not the case, though. And it also just seems so unlikely to me that long-term Simmons and Embiid both stay healthy. The upside is so tantalizing between them, but the chance of them hitting it is so low. It just feels like an overall is coming. That on top of there's always been reports that the two of them don't necessarily get along the best.
I appreciate your take. It's a fascinating conversation with the Warriors being in the driver's seat of some really big assets. And not really matching up on their timeline.
Well, how about this though? Before we go on, I'll ask you something that's a little bit different, because I'll take the 76ers out of the equation a little bit. If you're Golden State, would you rather have Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid?
Ben Simmons. I don't think it's particularly close either. But the first thing that I want to do after I end up having Ben Simmons is jettison Draymond Green.
That's part of the issue I have, is that I don't see how you could play a lineup with Ben Simmons and Draymond Green together.
I don't think you can either, but I think Ben Simmons in the Draymond Green role from 5 years ago is electric on that team.
I do too. I don't know how you get off the Draymond Green contract, though. I don't know how you get off the Andrew Wiggins contract either. So that's a whole other issue.
All it takes is one asshole. 1,435 people in here. Exactly. I mean, yeah, honestly. 1,435 people in here. Only 145 likes. Not going to get it done. I don't like that 10% ratio. We got to bump it up to 20. We need like 280, 290. It's just not enough. We're bringing the goods, people. NBA Live Before Lock playoff edition. We've got 34 minutes until we get to lock. So we got to move it over here. Joe Harris out of the bubble, out of the Nets rotation. Tyler Johnson starting. What do you like from the Nets? Who's the biggest benefactor to the suddenly available 36 minutes from Joe Harris?
I still like Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot. I understand that he's going to be chalky, but I think it's chalk worth eating, because like we talked about him the other day, and we said which players on the Nets are still going to be in the game in garbage time, we said the other day. And I said, I think it's TLC. I think that regardless of game script, if it's close, he's going to be out there shooting threes. If it's a blowout, I still think the Nets probably going to have him out there on the court, because like when we look at the game where they rested everybody against the Bucks, TLC started and played 31 minutes. So I think that he's going to be on the court regardless of game script. So I think that he makes a lot of sense as a value play. He's also probably going to be the highest, if not the highest, then one of like the three or so highest owned players on the slate. But to me, it's just the price is right and just the playing time is secure. And with a lack of cheap options that I'm really confident in, I'm fine with eating TLC chalk on this slate.
Let's see if you're still fine with eating TLC chalk on this slate. Our ownership projections through most of the day have had TLC in the mid-30s. We got an update 5 minutes ago. He went up a bit. How do you feel about TLC at 61?
Well, that's all right. That's a little ridiculous. That's a number that I was not quite expecting to see.
That was a number that I had. I don't feel as enamored with 61% TLC when he's also owned at 61%.
I still think he's viable, but it's not ideal. I'll leave it that way. So I think the way that we have to talk about it then is who would you pivot off of in the Nets lineup? Yeah. Because if TLC doesn't necessarily play well, like what are the circumstances where that happens? One guy that I think makes sense as a clear pivot would be Garrett Temple at 5,100. But what is I'm looking at the updated ownership now, whereas Temple's at 19%, so that's still pretty significant, but it's a third of what TLC is. So I do think it makes sense to have some lineups where it's like, hey, I'm gonna have Temple in there instead of TLC. Where is Tyler Johnson at now? Tyler Johnson's so tough to trust.
Tyler Johnson at 16. Kuruk's at 5 now. I think that's the move.
Kuruk stinks too now.
I don't disagree. I'm talking from a just GPP play, 3,800 for Kuruk's now. If TLC is 61, does TLC really outscore Kuruk's 11 times as often? I don't think so.
No, I don't know that I necessarily like Kuruk's either. Maybe I'd go to, all right, if I go in like way off the board, how about Jeremiah Martin off the bench then? Because Jeremiah Martin, at least this year, in his limited minutes, he's scoring 13 DraftKings points in 11 minutes. So there's so little information on him. Who knows what happens? But I mean, just look at somebody who's like way off the board on the Nets. Like I'd feel better about him than Kuruk's, just because I'm like pretty confident that Kuruk's isn't a good fantasy producer. Jeremiah Martin probably isn't, but maybe he is. So that's, you know what I mean? Though.
Oh, I do.
That logic. Like Jeremiah, and nobody's playing Jeremiah Martin.
Now, for the record, this morning on the show, I said, I have no idea if Jeremiah Martin's even steps foot on the floor, but of all of these nameless dudes at the end of the Nets rotation that could soak up these additional minutes, Jeremiah Martin is the guy that you want to have a look at. But like, you're obviously not playing like a lot of him. You don't even know if he sees the floor.
No. I usually don't play showdown lineups on DraftKings. I made one showdown lineup just to throw Jeremiah Martin into single entry lineups in showdown contests. Like, I think for GPP, he isn't an awful play. The other thing too is, if this game is a blowout, which there's a pretty good chance of that happening, right? The Nets don't have Joe Harris, 30 double-digit underdogs. The spread probably isn't wide enough. I'm pretty confident Jeremiah Martin's on the floor in the fourth quarter of a 20-point game.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that he should be. They are open to do anything because this is not a real basketball team right now. But I agree that he should be out there in that scenario.
They oddly compete every game, though.
They do. I don't think today is going to be that day.
So how do you feel about Caris LeVert, then?
I have 20% on DK right now. By the way, I had 60 and change of TLC up until that ownership run. I now have 40. So him coming up in ownership just naturally brought me down. I think he's going a tad high now, but I can't avoid him. So, LeVert is 8,100 is a lot, and I don't even necessarily know if Joe Harris being out is helpful to him. There are so little like actual NBA players on the Nets that it might just be beneficial to have Joe Harris spacing your floor for LeVert's true upside, but he's just going to shoot as much as he wants. If those are going in, great. Like, I know that's oversimplifying it, but that's really how this is. It's either going to be great because LeVert's gunning, or it's going to be a really inefficient 4 of 21 for the day, and the Nets get beat by 25.
So here's the thing, a couple of things about LeVert. Number one, and now looking at the updated ownership, it's too high. Like, it's hard to justify being even with the field or even overweight to Caris LeVert. Like, I definitely feel more comfortable being underweight to him. And I also think there's a lot of blowout risk in this spot. At the same time, he's shooting 27% from the field in this series and scoring 45 DraftKings points per game. So if he's like moderately efficient, like, the ceiling's ridiculous, because that's also the only way that the Nets stay in this game. I think the best way to build lineups, if you want to go with LeVert, is you'd make game stacks, right? Like, I think in that case, if you want to go LeVert and TLC, like, pair them together with like Siakam and Lowry or something like that. Like, I'd set some kind of rule like that in Fantasy Cruncher, because that's how I think you capture the upside. It's hard for me to imagine that Caris LeVert plays really well and then like Lowry or Siakam doesn't have a big game on the other side. Because if this game is close, some guys on Toronto are going to smash.
Oh yeah, no doubt. If you're able to get, I don't want to say full run out of Lowry and Van Vliet, because these dudes get full run no matter what the status of the game is. They're just going to play 40 minutes. But Siakam in particular, if this game is close, you have to assume. See, that's where it gets squirrely. Is the game close because Toronto's playing bad?
That's kind of what happened last game. Although the Nets also shot like crazy from 3 last game. And that's the other thing that I say without Joe Harris, the reason this game's a little more likely to be a blowout is Joe Harris is such a good shooter that he adds that level of variance to the Nets, where it's like, hey, we're out of the game. Joe Harris could make 5 or 6 threes in a game, and they don't have that element anymore. Like, Kurix isn't going to make the same amount of threes. Like,
no, I hope he does.
Yeah. But it takes away a level of variance that I think the Nets need as a team who's just way outgunned in this series.
Is there anybody we haven't talked about yet that you want to make sure that we talk about now? We don't want to leave anybody hanging with takes that don't make it before lock.
What's your 1 to 10? What's your level of confidence in Tyler Johnson? He's played fairly well when he's been on the court. He's played fairly well when he's been on the court this year, but I mean this series. And his usage rating is the most crazy consistent thing I've ever seen. He has a usage rating in between 19.8 and 21.1% every game over the last 2 weeks. So yeah. I feel pretty confident that I know what his usage rating is going to be.
I would say 2.
Yeah, I'm probably about a 1. The other thing too is I just don't know how much he's going to play. Like, even in other games he started for the Nets, he started against Orlando and played 22 minutes. He started against Boston and played 25 minutes. It's really hard to know what his playing time is going to be. There's so much variance there.
Yeah, I gave him 27 minutes, and I'm still not really getting to him. And I don't feel comfortable going to a lot more than that. I would be more likely, I think, to take a minute off than put a minute on. And at that case, I'm like really scared. So I'm just hoping he sucks. Honestly.
Yeah, no, that's reasonable. And It's also, of all the players on the team, he probably has the toughest matchup because he's going to draw Kyle Lowry for a decent amount of the time. Yeah. So there's reason to not really like Tyler Johnson. I think that there's upside there to get like a small amount of exposure to him. But there's other guys in the 4,000 price range that are better plays.
Let's take a quick look at where we are on ownership right now. 300 likes we're at. Perfect. 300 for 1,500. That's what I'm talking about. We'll get it up to like 4 or 5. I'll bludgeon you with requests shortly. TLC at the top of the ownership table on DK right now. LeVert second, Luka Doncic third, Reggie Jackson fourth. And the guy that's fifth, we haven't spoken about, and we've been talking about the Nets for 10 minutes. How do you feel about Jarrett Allen?
So I like Jarrett Allen-ish. I just like other center options better.
Yeah.
You know, like I'd rather pay up for Joel Embiid. And I get that Jarrett Allen's playing really well in the series, and he kind of has to because the Nets don't have a backup center. Like they just don't have any other big men to put out on the floor. So that's why we've seen Jarrett Allen play 41 minutes last game, 34 minutes the game before. Must-win game for him. So, you know, you assume he's going to play big minutes again. But I don't really love the 7,100 price tag, and I'd rather find the space to go up to Embiid.
Xander Schauffele, birdie putt, 20 feet to get to 4. No, he lipped it out. Oh, I wish I didn't turn to my left on that one. Not that I needed a Xander birdie or anything there. Come on, -3 cut. That would be helpful. Yeah, Jarrett Allen at 7,100 is just tricky for me. You need every single minute. If he gets any sort of foul trouble, he's going to have a lot of trouble meeting that price tag. We've got like Pascal Siakam is 7,300 today. I have a hard time going to Jarrett Allen at essentially the same price compared to Pascal Siakam. Rudy Gobert, $300 more expensive than Jarrett Allen. I just feel more comfortable going to someone like Rudy Gobert in this spot than Jarrett Allen because the game means so little to Brooklyn. It's just, I'm surprised to see him have that much ownership. I'm coming in light, very, very light.
Yeah, this is one of the least significant playoff games I could ever remember. Like I've never seen a team punt the playoffs as hard as the Nets are doing it.
It's shocking. It's shocking. They're dropping people like flies. If we look at the rest of the ownership, Norm Powell, 24%. Is that an overreaction to Wednesday, or does that seem right to you?
It's a little bit of an overreaction to Wednesday, especially because he closed that game. And if this game is, and he also played really well, so he just got himself extra minutes. But if we look at, he played way less minutes in the first game. I mean, he also got into some foul trouble, but it's really hard to look at his 32 minutes from last game and just be like, oh, Norman Powell plays big minutes. We played 17 minutes the game before. So to me, I look at the ownership of Norman Powell, and he's somebody who I'm pretty comfortable pivoting off of because I think it's really hard to be confident in his playing time.
Yeah, he came in the middle of the third quarter and never left the floor again. And that coincided with, you know, a 25-5 run or whatever to end the game.
And if
I think he closes in an optimal scenario, I just don't ever think that I just don't assume it's close.
Yeah, if the game's a blowout, then it's gonna be like Matt Thomas and Chris. It's gonna be like Matt Thomas, Chris Boucher, Terrence Davis out on the court, and I don't think that Norman Powell makes the garbage time lineup. Like he's in a really weird playing time situation where he's like too good to be a garbage time player, but he's not quite good enough to be confidently on the floor for like 30 minutes.
So here's the biggest piece of this. Does it matter to you that RHJ is out?
I think it gives like maybe a more chance of guys like Jeremiah Martin or Kurucs playing extended minutes. I mean, never mind. I'm looking at the wrong side of the game. So for the Raptor side, it doesn't really because he wasn't.
I had him in for 8 minutes today.
So the other thing too is he wasn't playing big minutes. The minutes are so easily filled by Chris Boucher. Like I have Boucher for 8 minutes right now. And I think that's pretty reasonable to just think that he just takes the minutes RHJ was playing.
I mean, I think they can be filled by literally anybody. You can move OG up the spectrum. You can move Pascal Siakam up the spectrum. And if that means that you just bring on Terrence Davis or Matt Thomas, I think that's just as easily like RHJ's minutes can be filled by literally any position on the spectrum, given the way that the Raptors are set up. So I don't think it matters other than it makes you feel a little bit better about playing anybody that does play for the Raptors. You don't expect the actual rotation members to be negatively affected. We have 20 minutes to lock. I'm excited. I'm starting to get ramped up for this. Who do you think's going like wildly missed today? Anybody that you see that has pretty low ownership that you're surprised by?
Let's see. I'm just refreshing to look at what the latest ownership is. TLC has gone down from his 63% to 59. So that's
I ended up going from 41% to 42 on that switch. Any interest? I'm going to rattle off a couple of guys that we have under 10% that I have a bit more of, and they're all your sort of mid-tier value or low-tier value guys. Dorian Finney-Smith, Seth Curry, Daniel Tice, Matisse Thybulle. Any interest in any of those guys?
So not one of the ones you mentioned, but here's a guy that I do think it's sub 10% ownership, has upside. Alec Burks. Because Alec Burks, like really odd because, and I was doing a show with Lofty the other day and he was really hard on Brett Brown for this because, I mean, he's always hard on Brett Brown for everything, except he was really...
Lofty has a hard on for Brett Brown. Yes, you're correct.
But Brett Brown, after the first game, was talking about, hey, Alec Burks, we need him in the rotation. He's a big part for us. And then he just barely plays the game after that, even though he played well in the first game. So he plays 28 minutes in the first game of the series against Celtics, scores 28 DK points, becomes a fairly popular play on the next slate for game 2, and just oddly plays 16 minutes. And they needed scoring. So that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But I look at the 76ers rotation and say, what can they mix up? What can they change to make a difference? And I think the most sensible thing they could change from last game is just give Alec Burks like 28 minutes. So I look at him at sub 10% ownership as a guy who could have upside and isn't really like that unlikely to hit it either.
I have that ownership as well. I got him at 25% right now. So I am team Alec Burks with you. I think someone steps up from Dallas that isn't one of Luka or Kristaps Porzingis, whether that's DFS or Seth Curry or Tim Hardaway Jr. I think somebody separates from the pack there. I'm hoping that it's Seth Curry because I like him and he's been playing out of his mind in this series. So I'm going to try to attach myself to Curry right now at 3,900. Any other like sub 4K guys that you think are value plays that people aren't talking about?
Let's see. I'm going through the ownership right now. I mean, a lot of these guys I just don't want to be on. See, Denver's rotation, some cheap guys there, but I don't really love that game either. Like if I had to pick one guy, Alec Burks is definitely the one for me in terms of a cheap guy that's going overlooked. How do you feel about Paul Millsap after last game? Because I'm still in that situation where we talked about it the other day, where I'm like, I don't have any confidence in Paul Millsap's minutes.
Correct.
And I still think there's a chance he plays minutes, but it's such minimal. I mean, he played 18 minutes last game. I get that they got blown out, but even if that game was close, he was not playing like 24 minutes or anything like that.
I am on the Paul Millsap hill again today. Nothing crazy, but I don't think that he is just fully cooked or washed. There's going to be a day where they're either looking to rely on his defense or maybe not even necessarily rely on his defense, but not rely on Michael Porter's lack of defense. I expect him to be out there eventually. I think having Mike Conley back is also important for Paul Millsap in this particular case. Just another, like they're getting another good player back. I think Millsap is like, you don't want Conley to be able to cook on Michael Porter Jr. Like Conley is way too savvy for the mistakes that he makes. So not that Porter's playing a lot more at the 3. It's probably a bigger benefit to Jeremy Grant, but that's just more minutes to go around sort of on the wing, so to speak. He's 4,400. Like he doesn't need all that much to go crazy. And they're going to need Paul Millsap if they have any aspirations of continuing through these playoffs. If they're putting Paul Millsap on ice, I don't think that the Nuggets are long for the postseason. They might just so happen to make their way through it because the Jazz are also cooked. We shall see. This is a gigantic game 3. But at least for game 3, I'm team Paul Millsap again. But I'm not going too crazy. I'm going way crazier on Jamal Murray.
You mentioned Mike Conley. I like Mike Conley a lot in this game. I think that price tag is way too cheap for him at 5,900. If we look at his numbers in the bubble prior to getting shut down, he's a guy who's scoring about a fantasy point per minute. As a starter, 32 minutes per game, 31 DraftKings points. now in a really pivotal game 3 must-win game with not really must-win, but tied 1-1, game that both teams definitely want to win. I think we see starters play extended minutes. I think Conley could push for 36 plus minutes in this spot. As a guy who's scoring about a fantasy point per minute, he's too cheap for me at 5,900. And the ownership isn't necessarily like low on him, but seeing him projected for 16% ownership, like that's somebody I want to be overweight to the field on.
I'm really nervous about my exposure to Mike Conley. I basically don't have him. I have him in like 2 lineups.
I think it's a mistake.
So I don't disagree with you. He does not grade out as someone that I should only have in 2 lineups. I actually have his odds of being a top 8 value play for this slate higher than where his ownership is. In most cases, I'm going to end up with that much or the field on Conley. In this particular case, the way that I'm sorting out my lineups, he is one of the guys that stands out as a clear casualty of something that is causing his ownership to come down for me personally. But if I could just look at my computer and be like, okay, raise Conley and then just fix itself otherwise, he would be one of the first names that I would go to increase my exposure because it doesn't match where I actually have him grading out. He's one of the guys that I'm most fearful for today. I'm trying to tell myself to be okay with it because I don't know if he's going to just play 36 minutes. I don't know how limited he'll be coming back.
I think that's fair. That would be, if I had one concern about him, it would be that, hey, he was away from the bubble for what was it?
Birth of his son.
About a week. Yeah. But at least there's no injury involved, right? So I would be way more concerned if it was his hamstring acting up again or something like that. Yeah. I mean, we look at him as just away from the team. I have to assume that he was keeping himself in shape, even though it was with his family, was, at the hospital, birth of his son or whatever, but he knows the gravity of this game, right? So I have to assume that he was keeping himself well-conditioned. And so I think that he's going to come back and right away go back to playing like his full minutes plus a few extra minutes. And I also think this is a matchup that he could totally take advantage of.
So I'm just bucketing off a group of 8 players right now. I have Conley with that 20% chance of being top 8. Other guys that are right around him: Norm Powell, Caris LeVert, Royce O'Neale, Maxi Kleber, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Paul Millsap. I have 20% of every single one of those guys except for Mike Conley. He is the only guy in that group that is slipping through the cracks. I think Jamal Murray is probably the biggest cause for it. Positional overlap, Murray grades out just a hair better, so it's pinching Conley out. Similar story, if I go down one additional notch, it's Reggie Jackson, another guy that I'm not getting to. So Conley just appears to be a casualty of my sorting process. I would almost guarantee he goes nuts today now that I see it.
Yeah, I like Conley a lot. So I'll say this also. How many minutes did you give Conley?
34, I believe. Let me double check it.
I have him a little bit higher than that. And then the other thing too is, like, if you assume that Conley plays like 36 minutes or so, like I think he does, that hurts Donovan Mitchell, that hurts Joe Ingles, Jordan Clarkson, that hurts Royce O'Neale. So I don't like those other peripheral guys on the Jazz because I think they all take a pretty big hit with Conley coming back.
Yeah, I don't have any Mitchell. I'm light-ish on Gobert, but I don't think Conley's like. I think Gobert is the one guy that it doesn't make a difference whether Conley's there or not in the grand scheme of things. Like, he's just going to play whatever he can play. I'm relatively neutral on everybody else except for Royce O'Neale. That one's the one that makes me a little nervous. I'm not entirely sure how much of a haircut he takes. I think that they might just try to really lean on those 5 guys. I think Clarkson probably is the biggest loser in all of this. I don't think anybody's going to disagree there either. And now his price is inflated because of Conley being gone. So Royce O'Neale is the only guy that I'm still getting to. This just feels like it's not comfortable. I see a Royce O'Neale 6 fantasy point game coming here. But he's looked good in the first 2 games. I just don't know how much Conley affects him.
So he's looked good-ish. Like,
he's looked good for Royce O'Neale.
Yeah, that's fair. He's looked good for Royce O'Neale. But the usage is so low.
Yeah.
Like, the first 2 games, his usage at 9% and 5%. Then we look at last game, he scored 37 DraftKings points, which is obviously terrific, but he had 8 assists. Now with Conley back in the lineup, like, I have to assume almost all his playmaking ability, his playmaking opportunities evaporate. It's just not going to be something that's on the table for him anymore. So I'm looking more at what he did when Conley was active before, and he was actually still decent in those spots. But there was a ton of steals, which I don't really think is sustainable. Like his steals in the bubble when they were still playing regular minutes, 4 steals, 2 steals, 2 steals. The minutes were really high. The usage was still low. His efficiency's overall been pretty solid in the bubble. I think Royce O'Neale's fine at 4,100. But I think there's other guys still in that 4K range that we've talked about that I would like over him.
How many minutes do you have him playing?
30.
Oh, okay. So that's the big difference there. I have him in for 34. It's not that I have him projecting all that well. 0.68 FanDuel points per minute. That's not a great rate. I'm betting on the playing time here. I'm hoping that Jordan Clarkson is the guy that takes the biggest haircut for this, and Royce O'Neale can just go be Royce O'Neale. We shall see.
I don't think Clarkson is good at all, except I also find it hard to just totally like nuke him from the Jazz rotation because it seems like they've been pretty committed to him.
I gave him 28 minutes.
Which makes him not in play for me. But I also think that with Conley coming back, Clarkson losing some minutes, I also still have to think that Royce O'Neale loses out on some minutes.
Well, I hope not. But I think that's a very reasonable scenario.
And it's not like he's playing. I mean, he's playing a healthy amount of minutes, but the last 2 games of the series, 32 minutes, 35 minutes. So I just think that with Conley back, it stands to reason he plays a few less minutes. That's why I think that 34 isn't super likely. I mean, it's possible though. If they get in a situation where they need to play defense, then it's going to be Royce O'Neale on the court instead of Jordan Clarkson.
Yeah. Do you think they would close with Clarkson over O'Neale even if they were behind a little bit?
Yes, because we've seen them do that in other games that mattered.
That's fair. 8 minutes to go. Make sure you're getting your lineups in, everybody. You want to take some questions?
Let's do it.
All righty. Premium Slack. If you want to get some questions in, feel free to tag me right now. YouTube chat, you better hope you get a good one. And hit that thumbs up. The more thumbs ups you hit, the more likely I am going to be to answer a YouTube question, chat. Are y'all going to answer questions besides your own or what? I'm not going to answer that question. Walk me right into that one, bad Santa. OG or Powell in a GPP?
I feel more confident in OG on Anunoby. For one, he's starting. The other thing too, like we said before, like Powell played 17 minutes 2 games ago. Like OG on Anunoby, we know he's going to be on the court in a close game. I have less confidence that that's going to be the case for Norman Powell.
I am in the exact same boat. Although I do have enough Norman Powell to be happy about it, but if I had to pick between the two, it's going to be OG. Any thoughts on Marcus Smart?
I mean, here's the deal. He's gonna have to play a decent amount of minutes with Kemba Walker out. I mean, not Kemba Walker out, with Gordon Hayward out. The thing that's weird about the Celtics situation is it's hard to kind of isolate their on-off numbers this year because they've had so many injuries that some guys, it looks like they've been really good with certain players off, except that's also because like 1 or 2 other guys were also hurt at the same time. So I think Marcus Smart at 5,400 is fine. I think he's viable. He averages over 30 fantasy points for the season as a starter. He started last game in place of Hayward, played 30 minutes. I actually kind of think that's a little low. Like I think that he should play more minutes than that today. The one question mark I'd have there is the game going to be a blowout? But overall, I think Smart is a decent option.
Just got the super chat from Justin Swearingen. So thank you very much, Justin, for that. We appreciate it a lot. Can you review your best FanDuel plays? Thank you. I certainly can. So for right now, I can go sort this table. Favorite plays on FanDuel. At point guard, it's going to be Mike Conley at the top for me at 5,800. He's grading out best there. Shooting guard looking like Paul George, Luka Doncic. I'm trying to spend up. TLC at 5,100, not bad. I like Kawhi, OG. Matisse Thybulle, if you need to pay down, 3,600. Porzingis at power forward. Kuruk's at the flat minimum. I'm willing to take a flyer on. And then at center, Embiid and Jokic are pretty clearly at the top for me. If you need to get really weird, feel free to grab a little bit of Enes Kanter.
For me, I would go Montrezl Harrell if I wanted to go cheap at center on FanDuel. One guy that we haven't mentioned that I think warrants discussion is Kemba Walker, just because that price tag is still low. And he's somebody looking at the
one of my favorite plays of the day, by the way, on DraftKings.
Where is his?
He has my third most exposure today. He's at 17% on DK.
Okay, yeah, I was looking through it, didn't see him at first look. So I like Kemba Walker also. He's just somebody who, if we look at the historical pricing, something else we talked about the other day, he's not nearly the same price tag that he was earlier in the season. And there's no reason to think that he shouldn't be the same level of player that he was when he was like an 8K guy earlier in the year. Like even though he was playing decreased minutes in the bubble, it was just because the Sixers were saving him for the playoffs. So he only played 26 minutes last game, but it was because it was a blowout. And I get that a blowout could happen again, but 2 games ago in a more competitive game, he played 35 minutes. That's more in line with what I expect from Kemba Walker.
Speaking of Kemba Walker, and as I mentioned, I have a ton. You and I are on the same page here. This super chat from D Freshness. Monster super chat. Thank you very much, D Freshness. I'm happy to. It's not even a question. This is just thanks. Big 10K the past week with missing the 150K on Wednesday by 8 points because Kemba sat the final 6 minutes. Love everything you guys do here. Thanks. I mean, congrats on the 10K. Obviously, the 150 would feel just a little bit better. But congrats, man. Happy to have you here. Continued success, I hope.
And
I'm willing to let you finish second today behind me.
And Kemba plays those extra minutes today, unless the Sixers lose by like 20 points again.
He's really the only guy from the Celtics I'm interested in. So it's probably going to be a monster Jaylen Brown day.
I definitely don't like Jaylen Brown. I think Marcus Smart's okay, and I don't mind Daniel Tice relative to his ownership.
Any interest in Kristaps Porzingis at 8,500 today?
No, it's a little bit too much for me. I mean, if somebody wanted to play him, I wouldn't say that it's a bad play, but if we were to rank all of the high-end guys on the slate, like he would come in last for me amongst Doncic, Embiid, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. Like I would have Porzingis below all of those guys, and that just makes him really tough to prioritize in lineups.
Yeah, I have very, very little there. Any interest in Torrey Craig today? This is coming from Elusive Smoke. Wants to know if he should hurt himself because he's playing Torrey Craig. I had a lot Wednesday. I only have 9% today.
So here's the issue with Torrey Craig is so he's been playing minutes like when it's opportunistic. So meaning that in the first game of the series, he played 21 minutes, but he also fouled out. Then last game he played 28 minutes, but it was because the game was a blowout and they needed to get offense on the court. But I look at this situation for this game now with Donovan Mitchell playing a lesser role with Mike Conley back. If we don't expect Mitchell to have like 40% usage rating and taking a million shots again, I think there's less of a need for the Nuggets to just force Torrey Craig minutes.
I feel the same way now. That's why I've kind of muted him a bit. He's just going to be a matter of circumstance. I have him down to 28 now. Makes him viable at 3,500. There's only so many options on a 4-gamer, but I don't see anybody really on the Nuggets side to go too crazy about, other than my boy Jamal Murray, who I'm sure is going to be ultra passive and make me hate him. 2 minutes to go. Actually, 1 minute to go. Just flip to 129. If you don't have your lineups in, hustle, I would say 55 seconds. Just get it in. At the very least, get yourself in a dummy with the 9 p.m. games and go ahead and late swap yourself. I really wish that the Raptors-Nets game was not the first game. That's really boring and not fun to watch.
At the same time, though, if you're somebody who needs to make late swaps or whatever, that's kind of the ideal game to have first.
Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily have to roster guys from that other than maybe like TLC. So it's pretty easy to just be able to, leave that out and then wait for maybe some like odd injury news or weird lineup news and make pivots.
So what are you cheering for when you turn the Nets-Raptors game on for today? I can tell you this much. I'm cheering against the Nets other than TLC. What are you looking for? What's your dream scenario for Nets-Raptors?
Blowout. A blowout where 15% of Jeremiah Martin is able to be the differentiator in making a GPP win happen.
Yeah, I'm just rooting for Raptors value, hoping that Kyle Lowry, Van Vliet, Siakam are all just kind of like, we'll all be nice about it. Casual 6Xers. And then OG and Norm Powell, well, OG in particular, just storms in big time. And then, TLC is whatever. But I have half the field in ownership for Brooklyn. So I'm very much rooting against Brooklyn.
The other thing also that I'm just kind of rooting for a blowout is like, I don't want the Nets to win a game where it's like we have to keep trying to figure out the rotation. Like, just let's let this series be over with, and then we don't even have to consider it for future slates. Like, I just want two comfortable wins in a row for the Raptors, and then it's like we're done trying to figure out the Nets rotations for the rest of the bubble, because they've been a little bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, I'm over it. Goodbye, Nets. Lose quickly today, lose quickly on Sunday, and call it a series. Yeah. But that's it. We're locked. It's game over. It's time to go watch some playoff basketball. It's time to do a little bit of a cut sweat. Scotty Scheffler shot a 59 today. That's kind of fun.
That's a good golf score.
It is a very good golf score. He had an eagle putt for 58 too. Didn't make it. It was a monster. And then, if you guys are with me, let's hope that Xander Schauffele makes the cut. You want to touch on anything else, Craig? You got anything else coming up today?
Let's see. So I've got, what's today? Friday? I've got the weekend coming up. That's nice.
Yes, it is. I also have the weekend coming up.
Yeah, I'm going to plug the weekend. Oh, what else is
big fan?
You know what else is coming up? I don't even want to plug this though. I have my 30th birthday over the weekend.
Well, happy early birthday. That's exciting. I'm assuming it's Sunday, or you would have just said tomorrow.
Yeah, it is. It is on Sunday.
Okay. That's exciting. I won't tell you. I won't say what I did on my 30th birthday on this show, because it is not appropriate for this particular show. But I enjoyed my 30th birthday quite a bit. I think that's everything. So happy early birthday to Greg. Best of luck to everybody that is watching on this show. I hope you have the guys that I have so that we can cheer together. We have MLB Live Before Lock coming up at 6 p.m. We have Alex Baker and Nolan Kelly at 7 p.m. doing a live best ball draft. So come check that out. The baller 2234 says, is Josh over under 35? That would be over by a hair. I am 35, but I'm counting the extra days past that. I think I'm 35. Yeah, I'm 35. So that's it. Thank you guys for joining us. Best of luck today. Shout out to SuperDraft for being the presenting sponsor of Live Before Lock. We'll talk to you again later. Jordan, play that music.